Spirit and Scrutiny podcast, episode 2, After the Threshold, When You Answer the Call. Welcome back to Spirit and Scrutiny podcast. I am your host, Flower. If you are new here, this is a podcast where spirit is welcome, but so are questions, where we explore spirituality, intuition, and the unseen world, but where we also bring discernment into the room. Because in my experience, the spiritual path isn't just about believing, it is about learning how to see clearly. And sometimes that clarity only comes after we believed something very deeply. I would like to start this episode by saying thank you to everyone who chose to tune into episode 1 of the podcast. I have heard from so many of you. I have received messages of congratulations. I've received reflections. I have received stories about so many of your own personal spiritual experiences. Some of you had shared that the first episode made you feel seen. Others said it gave language to things that you've been quietly questioning for years. And honestly, these responses mean so much to me in my heart, because when you start something like this, especially something as personal as a podcast about spirituality and discernment, there's always this small moment of wondering, will anyone understand what I'm actually trying to say? Is anyone else gonna recognize this strange intersection between spirit and skepticism that I'm trying to relay? And it turns out that so many of you do. Which means this conversation, this podcast, is needed. The spiritual world is a fascinating place. It is full of beautiful ideas, healing, awakening, energy, intuition, consciousness. But it's also a landscape where people are often searching. They are searching for meaning, searching for healing, searching for answers to questions that the ordinary world doesn't always know how to hold. And when people are searching like that, something interesting happens. They become open to new ideas, open to teachers, open to guidance. Sometimes that openness leads to incredible transformation, but sometimes it also leads us to becoming incredibly vulnerable. One thing I have noticed over the years in spiritual communities is that discernment is not always encouraged. Questioning can be framed as resistance. Doubt can sometimes be framed as a lack of faith, and curiosity can sometimes be quietly discouraged. But here's the thing. I've learned through my own experiences. True spirituality should never be afraid of honest questions. If something is real, it can withstand scrutiny. If something is grounded in truth, it does not collapse under curiosity. In fact, curiosity strengthens it. There was a time in my own spiritual journey when I trusted a teacher very deeply. At that point of my life, I was starving for guidance. I was starving for wisdom. starving for someone who seemed to understand the spiritual terrain better than I did. And when you are in that place, when you are open, searching, and hopeful, it can feel incredibly comforting to find someone confident in their understanding of the unseen world. Someone who speaks the language of awakening, someone who appears to have all of the answers. And for a while, I had believed what they were saying completely. I trusted the teachings, I trusted the process, I trusted the authority that they held in the space. But slowly, something inside of me started to feel uneasy. It wasn't in a dramatic way, not in a loud, obvious way. It was more like a quiet whisper, a subtle feeling that something wasn't quite lining up. And what I eventually realized was this. Every time my real human emotion appeared, grief, anger, confusion, frustration, the response was always to transcend it. Rise above it. Detach from it. Don't dwell there. Don't question there. Just move into higher consciousness. Become love and light. And at first, that sounds very spiritual. But eventually, I started to notice something important. My real pain was being skipped over. My real, raw, human experience was being bypassed. And that is when I encountered a term that made everything click. Spiritual bypassing. Using spiritual language to avoid dealing with the deeper emotional and psychological realities of being human. It's subtle, and it can be very convincing because it sounds enlightened at first, but it often does disconnect us from the very parts of ourselves that we actually need to be paying attention to. That realization was uncomfortable for me because it meant I had to reconsider something I had trusted deeply. And that is not an easy thing to do. But it was also one of the most important turning points in my spiritual life because it forced me to begin asking different questions. Not just, is that spiritual, but also, is this honest? Is this grounded? Is this actually helping people integrate their humanity or escape from it? This is where the heart of Spirit and Scrutiny podcast really lives. Not in rejecting spirituality, not in dismissing the mystical or intuitive aspects of life, but in allowing spirit and scrutiny to sit at the same table, to let wonder and curiosity coexist, to remain open without becoming naive, to stay receptive while also staying awake. Because in my experience, the most mature spiritual paths do not ask you to abandon your discernment. They strengthen it. Something else I've been thinking about lately is how easy it can be to give our authority away when we are searching. when we are hurting, when we are longing for guidance, when someone appears confident, wise, awakened, it's very human to lean toward that certainty. But real spiritual growth eventually brings us back to ourselves, back to our own inner compass, back to our own capacity to sense when something feels aligned and when it doesn't. And sometimes the moments that sharpen that compass are the most moments when we realize something we trusted isn't quite right. Those realizations can feel disappointing, but they're also deeply empowering because they return our own authority to us. So, before we close this podcast today, I want to invite you into a brief moment of breath. Wherever you are in this moment, if it feels comfortable, just take a slow inhale through your nose now. Allow the breath to expand your ribs and your belly. And then exhale gently through the mouth, allowing soft sound to come out, maybe a sigh. And again, slow inhale and soft exhale. Letting your body settle for a moment. Breath is one of the most simplest ways we reconnect with ourselves. It brings us back into our own physical experience, back into our own inner awareness, which is where discernment lives, often anyway. I want to leave you with a question to reflect on this week. Have you ever trusted a teacher, belief, or spiritual practice and later realized something didn't quite sit right? What did that experience teach you? Because sometimes the moments where our trust is challenged are actually the moments where our awareness can begin to expand the most. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being willing to explore this strange and beautiful intersection between spirit and scrutiny with me. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and keep asking the questions that bring you closer to truth.